back to your
Yeah,
your
like TV.
backup
That's what
wife is what it
babysitters
sounded
are
like.
for.
Yeah. No, I don't have any of those. The first one
Okay, that's good to
hurt
hear.
me.
All right, looks like we're live. Hello,
We're live.
everybody.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks, everybody, for joining who is currently watching the stream. This is A Wise Man Once Said, LitRPG's Love of Cultivation, and we've got with us 5 fantastic authors who are going to be discussing kind of their different cultivation fantasies. So why don't we just start? We're going to go around, and I'm going to introduce all of them one at a time, and they're going to explain what they write, who they are, all that fun stuff. So, Michael, why don't we start with you?
All right. My name is Michael Head. I am the author of the Threads of Fate series. It currently has 3 books out, with the 4th one hopefully coming before the end of this year, as long as we can get some cover issues solved between now and then. I'm also hopefully hopefully next year, sometime soon, going to be doing a series with Dakota Kraut. It's going to be a lot of fun. So. But it'll be a blend of both LitRPG and cultivation.
Fantastic. All right, Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan DeBruyn. So I write 3 series at the moment, one of which is cultivation, but cultivation kind of flows throughout all of them. So I have Ether Collapse, Ether Flows, and System Misinterpret. I have been reading in the LitRPG genre and cultivation genre since as far back as I think it kind of started, like just before, like when there was only so many books that you could get your hands on, and I just loved it. So that carried over, and I started writing in it, which was fantastic. Kind of fell into the writing part, I guess. But
Great. And Will, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Will. I write the Cradle series, and book 10 is coming out on November 2nd, so very, very close to that. Let's see. I'm not really sure what else to say about that. I write the Cradle series. It's basically my love letter to Chinese cultivation novels. They're it's one of my favorite subgenres. And it got to the point where years ago, had a hard time recommending a lot of my favorite books because for various reasons, my friends couldn't get into them. So I was like, I'm going to see if I can write a series that will pull them in so that they can then use that as a bridge to get to the real stuff. So that's been my goal ever since.
Fantastic. Awesome. Book 10, congrats on the pre-order.
Oh yeah, that's right. Pre-order is live. I should have my marketing brain should have kicked in, and I should have done that.
Don't worry, I'll cover for you.
Where's your brother?
All right, next up, Harmon.
Hey everyone, I'm Harman Cooper. So you might know me. I've written too many books, 60 plus right now, some of which aren't as good as others. But for this panel, I'll be speaking mostly about Pilgrim and also about War Priest, 2 cultivation books I'm working on right now. Also, maybe speak a little bit about this new project I'm launching. You can go to the website behind me. It's a community-driven, NFT-powered LitRPG fantasy series. It's never been done before, and I'm debuting it tomorrow. So I'm really excited about the way that goes. But who cares about that right now? I'm here with some great authors, and we're going to talk about cultivation, and I'm so stoked to hear what Tal has to say.
Fantastic, community driven. That sounds very new and very interesting. All right, next up and last but not least, Tao.
Hi guys, I'm Tao Wong. I write in the LitRPG section, System Apocalypse, Adventures Abroad, and the Hidden Wuxia series, and my much hated vampire novelette series, Eternal Night.
It happens.
The cultivation one I do, which is pretty much a very traditional Xianxia series, in the sense that it's more Wuxia based rather than modern Chinese web novel based.
Oh, fantastic. All right, so that's introducing everybody. I want to take a quick sec for those who are just joining us. We've got some people who are getting audio and some people who are saying hello from all over the place. As we're going along, guys, what we're going to do, speaking most of the comments, if you've got a question, drop it in the comments. And after we go through the kind of the starter questions, I'll start picking them and we'll ask these amazing authors here. So let's start off with kind of the big general question. What inspired or attracted you to writing in the cultivation style? And anybody can start whenever you feel like you have an answer.
So I've got a really simple answer for that one. 2 of the 3 people responsible for me writing in that genre are here right now. That would be Will and Tao. Their books, along with Dakota Kraut's Divine Dungeon series, which has some cultivation aspects to it. I love their books so much. I was like, you know what? I kind of want to write a story like that. So I did. I just changed mine to instead of having as much character development, there's just way more fight scenes. Like just nothing but fight scenes.
Just action.
This is the way.
Yeah.
This is the way. Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool being on a panel with some of your inspiration, I'm sure.
Yes, it's very cool. This is a lot of fun for me. I don't know about anybody else watching, but for me, this is super cool.
Okay.
He's squeeing right now.
Yeah, a little deep on the inside.
Yeah. So I guess I'll go next, just so go in order. So for me, I definitely started reading a lot of the manga and manhwas. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, if there's other ways to pronounce it. And I was constantly searching on Google, like, okay, well, what, I want one where there's a reborn. I want one when there's, more cultivation. I want something where it's martial arts driven, or it's a peak of this, or it's a peak of that. And I found that I kind of started running out of things to read, sorry. So I was like, okay, well, I'll try to write something. But of course, my understanding of the cultivation world isn't going to be as deep as, the traditional Chinese or Wuxia or Xianxia. And so I wrote something that like Will said, kind of wanted to connect to people that were kind of more from a different aspect, and that could connect with multiple people. And then since I came from the LitRPG genre, I also wanted to include some of that in it. So I had a really, really fun time with it. And I just wanted to explore some of the things that I wasn't seeing in those stories. So I wanted to explore, the cultivation techniques and why, the tension would be built and how they were cultivating to higher levels and build those situations into boss fights and character building situations that you don't get to see a lot of times. Sometimes you just, you got the heavenly way cultivation style, you're now all powerful. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, but there are quite a few that I read that were like that. So I wanted to dive into some of the other aspects that aren't explored as much.
Well, one thing I'm relatively new to the LitRPG and especially the cultivation genre, but one thing I've kind of noticed from all you guys and just the community at large is when you've kind of trailblazed your own path, when you find that there's not something that you want to read, you create it yourself. And so that seems to be kind of an ongoing theme of you guys are very much creating genres unto itself and just kind of discovering along the way what works and what you really enjoy. I love seeing the passion come through that.
Agreed. Yeah, one of the things I obviously touched on this just a minute ago, but one of the things that really inspired me to write Cradle to begin with was I read a lot of light novels. So I started off with Japanese light novels, and then I moved into Korean light novels, and then into Chinese light novels around 2014. And that was the kind of thing. And so those are mostly web novels, are mostly published one chapter at a time online. So that's a lot of what I read. But for various reasons, it's hard to get my friends to read those. So there's a few barriers to entry. One of them is all these are translated. So sometimes the translation quality can vary widely from one title to another. Another is a lot of these are written daily or every few days as chapters. So sometimes the original writing quality, even in the language of origin, is not super high. And some people can get caught up on that. And then, of course, there are a lot of genres, especially when you get into Chinese cultivation, that assume a level of cultural awareness and knowledge that a lot of my friends didn't have. So they're going in, they're not explaining what these concepts are. They're just assuming the reader's already familiar with them and then moving on. So then my friends would bounce off the first couple of chapters because they don't know what these techniques are. They don't know what the terms mean. So I had this list of cultural values and things that I thought was like, okay, look, I can take the essence of why I like these stories so much and try to get it into a series that is more, I guess, palatable for people here that I know that I'm friends with, so that then they can get into this, and then they can get into and maybe then use that as a springboard to get into the original novels that I enjoy so much. So that was really it was really a trap. I think that's how I would describe it. It was a trick. It was all an elaborate deception.
A big illusion.
Yeah.
Not bad getting more people reading. Harmon, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say for me, the way I got onto it is kind of life experience. So I studied Tibetan through the School of International Training in Nepal, and that introduced me to kind of the Himalayan region cultures. And, I ended up living in India for a while, in Bhutan. And then when I came back to America, I applied for the Fulbright for Mongolia because I had never thought about going to Mongolia, but I had an advisor that was like, hey, you studied in Nepal, maybe Mongolia would be next. And now I ended up living there for 3 years. I ended up living in Japan. I have a Mongolian wife now. And it just kind of opened my world to all these things. And what I've been able to pull from it is just this great, like, this deep well of stories and ideas. And so my stuff doesn't really move toward the Chinese side of things. I really like using yokai, and I really like using Japanese mythology, and then also Mongolian things that I've experienced, because I did do some pretty wild things in Mongolia. Like I went to the far western region where I found the green tar reincarnation with a friend of mine who happened to be this little old lady who lives in a monastery in the middle of nowhere. And it took us hours to get there, and like, some weird things like that. So that it was more for me a life experiencing. And then this brings me to Tao. I saw him writing in this genre, and I was like, and I started like reading into it, and he helped me in the beginning, because I sent him some Facebook messages like, hey, like, should I be doing this or this? And he gave me some advice on there. So I really appreciate that. And it kind of kickstarted me onto this. And so that was my first foray, which was Way of the Immortals. And I wanted to do better. And so I launched Pilgrim, which has been done really well for me. And so that's the other thing about this community, is that it is a community. And that's what's the best part about it, is a lot of these authors you can reach out to, and they'll tell you like what to do and like how to do it. And so what you mentioned, Sean, about kind of growing your own thing and building that, there's people that are doing it all around you. So it's very inspirational. I mean, I couldn't pick a better time to be a writer.
It's an incredibly supportive community. Absolutely. Tao, do you have a kind of how you got into that, or?
Sure. Just to answer someone's question about cultivation quickly. Cultivation is basically the process of gathering energy or enlightenment generally into yourself. So it's an internal magic system where you basically then grow stronger because of it. And there's variations on how you do that. Ryan and M.H. Johnson's Silver Fox and the Western Hero use a more LitRPG kind of stat-based kind of thing. Well, the stats are sometimes just showing what's happening, but but that's the basic idea, is that the energy gets contained in someone. You're gathering it and you're growing stronger. Traditionally, if you're looking at Xianxia, that would be qi, basically, or qi, depending on which dialect you're using. For myself, I was reading a lot of Chinese web novels, and a lot of the Xianxia that's coming out from the Chinese web novels, the cultivation stories, are very different from the type of cultivation and Wuxia work that I knew, that I grew up with. Things like Wandering Hero, The Return of the Condor Heroes, Swordsman.
Condor Heroes was one of my original favorites, like way back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Feng Wan, all of these things that were that were the basis and grounding of what I learned or saw. It wasn't coming true. There was a lot of thematic elements of honor and sacrifice and tragedy. There's a lot of tragedy in traditional Chinese works, like super tragic stuff. And I didn't see a lot of that. And that drove me nuts. So I wrote my own version of the trip, kind of mixing some of the new, almost solidified concepts of levels that you see in modern day web novels with the older stuff that I knew. And I kind of mashed them together, hoping that something would click.
That's pretty incredible. Well, you started to touch on this, but the next question that actually kind of leads into the next question, which is, how does cultivation differ from kind of more traditional lit RPG? And from what it sounds like, it's maybe different in how the magic system, or how you said it's internalized. Is that correct?
Yeah. traditional Xianxia works, and it comes up a lot from Qigong and Taoist mythology, Taoist energy gathering. Basically, the goal is to gather energy into your dantian, and from there it solidifies and makes you healthier. And that's what Qigong these days does. As if you learn it in the real world and you learn to focus and move it around a little bit. The stories take it another level. They go and make you immortal. Basically, the progression is to immortality. Really, that's the idea behind it. The other systems, everyone else here, and that's why cultivation is almost a better term, because Xianxia is very Chinese focused, but Harmon does something that isn't Chinese focused. And then you've got Ryan, who's taken the concept and twisted it entirely. So, and Will, of course, obviously. I don't like talking about Will. He makes me jealous.
Hey, I don't like talking about Will either, so that makes two of us.
I'll talk about Will. What do you want to talk about, Will?
To pick off on what Tao said, and which is I've got, if I had enough time to actually do the research, it would just be fascinating. There's a lot in Asian mythology that relates to this in certain ways. Like if you look at India and you look at like chakra cultivation, my background from more of like a history perspective is with Tibetan Buddhism, and there's a lot of that as well about like this cultivating this inner thing to become immortal. And it kind of spans across that region in really cool ways. And my favorite thing is how it kind of, and what we're doing in this genre, which is kind of cool, is how it kind of modifies. So an example, the best example, and a very fast one I have, is that, so you can meet a Mongolian named Yim Dawa. Yim is the word for sun, and Dawa is the word for moon. But these are Tibetan words that they've utilized. And so when they name someone this, they've named someone this who was born between Sunday night and Monday morning, right? Because it's like between the moon and the sun. However, the Tibetans, they would never name someone this, and I mentioned this name to them, and they were laughing because it's not a common name in their culture at all. You usually have like Nyam Sudin or some like longer name that's related to it. So the reason I bring that up is because like as it has in Asia, like how these stories have moved and how these like the mythology has kind of moved. I feel that that's something that happens in the cultivation genre too, with people doing their different touches on it. And I think that's what makes it really unique. And I think that that's also what makes me wish I had enough time to like go back and find some of these connections and stuff, because I mean, we all have those things that we wish we could do. I really love reading history, and to see like how these connections are made is just, to me, a really fascinating part of this.
I just want to add like one of the things, like as much as yes, I did take the concept and twist it so it fits. I think you got to remember we all came from different backgrounds, which is so cool. Because when I was reading these stories, I was a professional athlete, so I was working every day to make myself better in the gym and getting reps and trying to eat healthy. And so I'm picturing all these things in my head of like, okay, well, this chicken is turning into energy. And I wanted to picture every rep that I did as something that was giving me power, that was strengthening my body, that was doing these things. And I wanted to take my my experience, that magic that these books brought to me when I was reading them and getting me through my workouts as I was listening to them on audiobook, etc. That's what I wanted to bring to this genre, is that magic that I felt from them. And so that's part of what I did, right? And I sorry that I did twist it quite a bit, but I mean, I think that's what's so beautiful about it, is that we get to all do that and take our own experiences and bring it to the table. Yeah, so Harmon mentioned earlier, and somebody, ties into a question somebody asked a second ago. So Harmon mentioned earlier that he's coming into it from the Chinese story side. And it's funny because I mentioned that I started with Japanese light novels. Well, I really started with anime and manga, of course, like a lot of people. And so that was where I came into with that. So there's still a lot of influence there. But somebody earlier asked if we spoke any Asian languages. Well, the only one that I have any experience with at all is Japanese.
I took 4 years of Japanese in college. The only ones that I've read any untranslated works of were Japanese. Please don't ask me any questions in Japanese. It's been so long since I've used any. It's been like 10 years since I've used any Japanese at all. So it's that the skill faded very quickly. But
you must remember some of it, like Nihongo ga hanashimasu ka?
Yeah. So the idea for me is that there was one, I guess, core fantasy that was being appealed to in a lot of these different cultures, and including in the fantasy novels that the Western fantasy novels I grew up with. And in a lot of cases, it's growing in strength and ability to manipulate the world or the ability to navigate the world around you. And I realized when I first started to write, I made this list of stuff that I like to see. And one of the things I realized quickly was that I liked it when it was the journey of the character becoming the best rather than them starting off as the best. I found that just more compelling, and I can relate to that more. I found it more interesting. And a lot of times when I was reading something about people that had started off the strongest, I was like, how did they get there? So what I liked particularly about the cultivation method is that this is a baked into the universe way of doing this. This is something where they're not only just becoming better at combat, they're also becoming more in tune with the universe and the other people around them and all this stuff. And it's very tied to the person's progression is tied to the progression of the story and the progression of the world, and progression of the universe. So the fact that that is baked down into the core of what the world is and what the genre is really what appealed to me. That's what I liked so much about it. What if you cut it down? And really that's what appeals to me about all these traditions from all over the world. I think it's that core of it is you're growing more competent and more connected to the world around you and more able to navigate and control, I guess, your own story, your own destiny, and that's a cool concept to me, and one that I think is resonant in all the books here. So when you take a more traditional approach like Tao does, or you take a weirdo approach like I do, it's it boils down to sort of this same concept of getting to know yourself better, getting to know the world better, and becoming better and growing, just becoming a better version of yourself.
Well, for those who haven't
seen it yet, I feel better now.
Well, for those who hadn't said it, Will, I think the question you're probably referring to is the one is, and I'll pose this to the rest of you who haven't seen it. How do you find a balance for player freedoms in affecting the game world, or their ability to affect each other's developments in... I'm not quite sure what this question is trying to say.
I saw a way more important question, and that is, do I have a mug for every one of my books?
I did see that one. That's right.
Yes, absolutely, I do. That's an urgent question that needed to be answered. And
that's demigod mode right there, man. I love it. Gotcha.
I think what this is trying to ask, and you guys correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it's trying to find how does a player's freedoms and their abilities affect what is a set in stone lore, or I guess tradition.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like my books are probably the furthest from a traditional that you can get, because I didn't do just an Asian culture. I also rolled in Arabic, African, because I spent a lot of time in the Middle East and North Africa and all this other stuff. So I feel like a solid answer is that whenever you are creating your story, you set ground rules, right? You've created this universe, you set ground rules, and those may be arbitrary, like it's that way because I said it's that way, or it may be it's that way because it's what makes sense. Or it may be something more traditional, like water cancels out fire and wind cancels out earth. Like when you're talking about different elements and how stories can change based upon the powers that certain individuals have. But I think that it's important as an author to always stay true to those rules that you set forward. And as long as you don't break those rules, readers are going to stick with you, and they're going to follow along in your stories. Also, I definitely need to up my mug game.
We're getting a lot of comments about the mug for sure.
Yeah, I've got this.
Now.
I'm like, I got a Mountaindale Press mug, but no, it's.
I think the number one thing I produce are mugs, and then like third is books.
The mixer bottle.
I just tried to match. That was my goal. I'll take it in a slightly different direction than Michael did and just say one of the interesting parts for Cultivation for me has always been how secretive everybody is usually in the traditional ones. Like everybody's got their secrets and they're holding power from each other, and there's like layers to stuff, right? So I think that I definitely tried to carry over into my book, really, because I think that's kind of at the heart of any Cultivation that I read, where it's like, you're not going to tell your secrets and let other people get powerful, because most Cultivation you get stomped if you're weak, and you take any advantage that you can, and you really turn it and capitalize on it. And I think that was kind of one of those things that I really wanted to have in my world, is like all these miscommunications, like it's like this world gets created and it kind of was an apocalyptic situation where suddenly Cultivation existed and everybody had to figure it out for themselves. And no one's really going to share, the best ways to do things. Like they're not just going to give that information out. And even if they do, they're going to give you the second best option, or the one that's going to ruin you, so that you don't come back and affect their power later. So I think that was the way that I balanced a lot of my characters against each other, is that they're all keeping secrets from each other. They're all holding out on each other to make sure that they can keep their power and keep their advantages over each other. So that's my answer to that question that was asked.
So I'm gonna answer the power progression question along with someone else's question about how fast you do it. And the simple answer is you figure out what your top level is from the beginning. What's your most powerful, whatever top it is. And then you figure out how many books you're going to write. At least for me, that's how I do it. I figure out how many books I'm likely going to write, and then I break it down. But this character has to hit X at this point. He has to hit this by this point if I'm going to hit that. And there's always flex in this. There's always flex because, inspiration hits you differently. But that's how I break it down. I know how fast I want to do it. Now, my power levels for my characters and my world in 1000 League is much lower. Like, I don't, the 1000 League universe, it doesn't skip planets like certain people. But so that means that I have to progress things slower. I find as well that certain, I love, again, Wuxia. A lot of my background is that. So the first few books were all pretty much Wuxia books because the power level was so low. And that's partly because I also love that area.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to cut in here, Tao. He's using the term wuxia as a distinction from the Cultivation novels we're talking about, because wuxia is, for those of you who are familiar with kung fu movies, a lot of them are in that genre. It's more like mildly superhuman or peak human, high level martial arts, versus using techniques that let you call lightning or fly or whatever. It's a lot more grounded in real martial arts tradition. I just wanted to distinguish that in case people weren't familiar. I'm sorry.
Yeah, like the Murum world.
I'm pretty much done anyway. Thanks.
Yeah. Like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I maybe dated myself there with that movie.
That was a sweet movie when it came out.
Yeah, it was. It was awesome.
So to the rest of you, I liked how you put that, Tao. That was actually a question when I saw that. That was kind of my question is, how do you decide, how do you keep kind of the characters balanced? So by book 2 of 10, they're not insane, bursting apart, tearing apart the world. So do the rest of you, is that kind of a similar process on how you decide how fast the characters progress and their power levels?
For me, I'll talk about my series Pilgrim because the next book's coming out in November. The way it's structured is the protagonist is he's half demon blooded, and he doesn't really like this aspect of him. And then there's a cultivation power that's utilized in the world based on heaven, which is fallen. And so what they're doing in the world is there are people that are cultivating what are called Senyata remnants, which are remnants of this heaven that's left. So you have a world where there's already only the mortal realm and the realm of hell, basically. And to keep him because he's stronger than most mortal people. However, there are people that have been cultivating these powers, and he's shunned it for 40 years. He's 40 years. The book starts with him actually retiring. He doesn't want to be an assassin anymore. And of course, like just like John Wick, that never happens because like everyone's still gunning for you. And that's kind of what he has to work through. And he doesn't even really start the cultivating process until much later on. So the progress for me is a very slow thing. And so there were people that dinged it because of that. But by the second book, he started finally deciding like he can grow stronger because he's now getting enemies from hell. Because it turns out his father is actually the ruler of hell and he wants him to take his throne. However, he also has a full demon-blooded brother who wants the throne instead. So now you have a brother who's light years stronger than you, who's being held back by a father who wants you to be the one who takes his throne. And you don't want the throne. And not only that, your mother's a nun, and she wants you to take the throne from your father so you can rebuild heaven. And so it's very much like a slow progress in terms of this guy's leveling up, even though he seems OP at first. I mean, he's a powerhouse, but he can't control his power. And so there's other ways to utilize these common tropes, and that being the way I utilize it in this book. If he draws blood, he summons demons from portals, and he's had this problem his entire life. And so he goes to extreme lengths not to draw blood, including having a sword that he can throw around so he doesn't have to get close to people. And because it freaks him out when it happens. Well, you have somebody who's OP, which it overpowered for those, you guys probably know OP, who's OP, who still isn't as OP could be. So there's definitely some progression involved there. And so I look at it in terms, the whole question, I look at it in terms of like, how to keep pushing it to something that's believable in terms of someone who's older and who doesn't really, maybe believe in wanting to change their power. Because, the whole you can't teach an old dog new trick type of thing. And it turns out you can.
Yeah, one of the things that I think you touched on, obviously, what you're primarily talking about is how to continually add believable antagonists that scale in power. But even from what you said, Harmon, and obviously Tao said it specifically, one of the tips I say to people all the time is at the very beginning of your series, establish the ceiling of your power system. So if you're going to be scaling up, if you're going to be writing progression, show the reader what the ceiling looks like from the beginning so that we have a reasonable idea of where we're going. One of the things I regret with Cradle is that the ceiling I showed was too high. So I didn't show an attainable ceiling. So you don't even get a sense for how powerful he actually can get over the course of the series. It's this way unattainable, unbelievable, time-reversing god. And that's too high, too much. Should have scaled that back. I should have taken notes from Coiling Dragon, where they show off the end of that world's power system, but not the end of the series power system. So that's just a specific tip that if anybody's out there looking to write, that's one of the things that I think is very important, is establish the ceiling quick.
Parameters.
And I think you're right. Like, it's funny because I wish I was as organized as Tao and I broke it down. So to answer your question, no, like, I mean, the thing is when you're reading traditional web novels, it's like they get to the end of the legend rank or whatever that rank is called. And then suddenly there's this whole nother realm above them, and it just starts going up again. And that's what I came into Cultivation reading. So that's kind of what I've envisioned a little bit, is that, there is levels to this. So the levels on the planet are different in different places. And I think that talks to what you just said as well, Will, is that, the series has this large power thing. And I think if we both probably read some of the same web novels where it's like, you just finished Legend Rank. Oh, that's the start of Cultivation. That's the start of true Cultivation. So that's, no, I wish I was more organized like Tao, and I tell him that in person too. So.
Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, like Tao nailed it whenever he first said, you look at how many books you want to write in the series, and then you base your power levels, the number of power levels off those books. That's exactly what I did. That's like he nailed it. I mean, I don't know what else to say to that, but making realistic bad guys or protagonists, that's the word. Fancy words. Making realistic protagonists as the main character grows in strength. For me, the route that I've chosen for that is to have my character travel through, and this is more like how a gamer would think of things. Like, he starts off in the starting area, And then as he moves around this gigantic empire, he's moving into harder zones where there's more powerful characters. So I think, I can't remember who said it, but there's a famous person who once said that the best authors are the ones that steal ideas from the greats. And so like every video game ever that is an open world video game does the same thing. And so I just stole that idea from video games.
Yeah, I would say the best authors steal the idea from video games then, right?
Why not? I'll take a piece of that $1 million industry.
Isn't the quote, stealing one thing is plagiarism, but stealing a bunch is research?
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Really good quote.
Yeah. Bits and pieces.
So it looks like we've got another question here, kind of along the same vein. So it sounds like, when you're doing the power progression, you're kind of setting up a kind of a framework along with the story, along with the lore. So Evan asks, how do you balance making breakthroughs interesting and having them feel like Deus Ex Machina? Is that a consideration when you develop your plot characters and plot?
Does he mean having them not feel like that?
I think he means
probably not
feeling like that. Yeah.
Unless that means that's what you're going for.
If that's your intention, absolutely. So do you guys
he phrased it correctly. He was saying, how is there a balance between making them interesting and making them feel like Deus Ex Machina? So obviously there is a balance. There's a lot of gray area there, and the readers have to. It's kind of up to the reader how it feels. That's always true when you're dealing with something that's interpretive like this. But it absolutely is a consideration, at least for me. And the way to kind of set that up is by setting it up ahead of time. It's by letting you know ahead of time what this rank is and how you get there. Even if the character doesn't fully understand it, at least having some idea of what you're supposed to be doing to make progress toward the next rank. And then having it not happen by, you actually happen to fulfill the requirements and the reader didn't know that and you didn't know that. The character can be ignorant. But you have to kind of know what's coming up and sort of have some. Now, the hard part is then doing it in a dramatic way that is also interesting. That's not just like, yes, they lifted every day at the gym and now they can lift more. So that's another thing that I wish I could have brought out even more in the Cradle series. Is some ranks are a lot more interesting than others. So one of the things I copied from my inspiration source material is there's usually 3 sub ranks at each major rank. So I was like, well, I don't know why they always do that, but they do. So I was like, okay, good. I guess I can see how that would make it feel like you've achieved something, and yet you haven't hit the new big rank yet. So I copied that general sort of structure. And I regretted that. I wish I'd had something special for every rank so that every rank felt like a new big breakthrough, so that you always had a better, because you're ranking up gradually, right? You don't need to get stage 1, rank 1 of Underlord. So because you're progressing toward the next thing, I wish I'd had each level felt even more distinct and even more, just have more punch to it. And it means something when you gain a new level. And some levels do feel like that, others don't. So I wish I had done that balance better for reasons like that.
Stealing from Jim Butcher, if you want your twist ending not to feel like a twist or Deus Ex Machina, foreshadow. It's all about foreshadowing, really. And that's same with enlightenment and anything like that. You need to foreshadow. Now, the trick is making sure that your foreshadowing is so light that they don't notice you're doing it. But when the twist comes or the moment of enlightenment or whatever happens, it's like, I see. I saw all of that beforehand, and now it makes perfect sense. You'll know when something isn't foreshadowed properly or sufficiently when you read a twist or a moment of enlightenment and it's jarring. It's just, where did this come from? At least that's, I'm stealing very heavily from Jim Butcher, by the way.
As everyone should. His writing advice live journal is invaluable.
It is.
Another thing that adds to that. Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, I was just going to add to that and say one of the things that I was trying to do, and specifically with my cultivation series, was to make, because like we all live in the video games for the boss fights and for the big moments and those big tensionable moments. And I think that was one of my goals with the cultivation, is to take that and turn it into a, you know, the boss fight. So the cultivation becomes more tensionable, more interesting, you know. So like when you're going to do a breakthrough, when you're going to do those things, you know, you set them up to build the tension and kind of have these breakthroughs mean more, not only to the character that you're writing, but also to the reader, because you know the tension gets so high that it, you know, there could be a failure. And I love Tao's books, as I love Will's, and I think everybody has done it differently. Like when I read Tao's, and I think one of them, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I think he fails at the very beginning of one of the books, and I love that. It was really cool. He fails to break through, and then we go forward and we see his struggle after that, and that's a way to do that too, right? And he did the foreshadowing was just talking about of that sort of thing, and that was a big, you know, big. Obviously, I love you, Tao, as an author, so that's, you know, you did a great job with that, and that's kind of what I was trying to do as well. So.
You know, yeah, basically rephrasing what Ryan said. There's also with writing fiction, and especially writing genre fiction and fantasy sci-fi, you obviously don't want your character to achieve it the first time, right? Like in a movie, if someone like, you know, beat the bad guy in the first scene, it'd be like, well, what the hell do I have to watch the rest of this for? And so it's very there's a technique to that as well, and it kind of oddly enough relates to this progression fantasy, relates to ranking up and doing all that. Like you need to have your character go through it, and so part of building it is that character actually going through it and failing, as Ryan said, and then getting stronger and coming back at it, because people like to see that, because people are doing that right now and they're struggling in the very same way, and every success that's made is made with that as a background, generally, like people trying over and over again to do better at it. So I think that relates to this fiction in that way.
We used to call it a glass ceiling in sports, where you're just banging your head against the ceiling over and over and over and over and over again until finally you break through. And then guess what? You're going to find another glass ceiling a little bit further on.
Well, Ryan, I think what you said about boss fights is a great way of encapsulating that concept, because it really is in a well-designed video game, you are learning and practicing these skills that the game is teaching you without even you realizing it. And then a boss fight should be the big test that's a culmination of all the techniques that you've learned to get there. And that's exactly story structure. That's exactly what a good climax of a story should be, is it should be a test of everything the characters learned and what they believe when they get there. So that is, and of course, this being the plot question, a lot of times being what level of advancement they're going to get to in this book, that then obviously should tie into the climactic moment usually. So of course, what I do is probably too often have the advancement and moment of breakthrough and revelation and advancement come in the same time as the actual boss fight that they're doing. So maybe I do that a little too much. I don't know, but that's kind of where that comes from for me, is the same place. And I think using the boss fight analogy is a great one. I think that communicates really well.
Thank you. I love that Will just said that to me, that I'm fanboying.
All right. Well, we've got a couple.
I saw that, Will. I saw that.
Yeah, we have an ongoing mug switching kind of debacle going on here in the comments section. So that's been interesting to watch unfold.
I'll stop with the mugs.
How many mugs do you have over there, Will?
I have 6 mugs here.
Oh my gosh!
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
man,
you want to get more mugs.
You're not supposed to reveal your secrets. That's the whole. The whole thing we're talking about here.
It's different. I change the logo out every time.
This whole time, I've just been trying not to crack up, because look, he did it!
No, he just did it again. Oh, they're on to you.
They are.
I told people this would be magical.
Oh man, it's fantastic.
Oh, it looks like we've got an interesting question here, or something I think I would like to know is, have you considered building the villain as much as the hero? They point to My Hero Academia, the anime, but one of the interesting points of that is the villains grow just like the heroes. So do any of you enjoy doing that or like doing that?
All right, I'll go.
All right.
I'll go
want
next. I'll go
that
after
sounds
Will.
great. So
Yeah.
in My Hero Academia is an interesting example there, because there's one arc in particular that focuses primarily on the villains, and I hate it. I don't have any emotional investment in these characters. I don't like them. I don't care if they succeed or fail. I don't have any attachment to them whatsoever, except as they're related to the heroes. I am invested in the heroes. So when they skip over to see the development of these villains, I wish they wouldn't. So that's kind of my answer. I spend a little bit of time in each book developing the antagonist, so that you do at least know who they are and where they're coming from. But I personally have very little patience for switching over to a character that I don't know well. So if it's not somebody I'm going to establish and then slide over, I don't like having a large subplot for characters I'm not invested in. So I don't.
Yeah, unless the main character might if the main character of your story is a villain, I side with Will on this one. Like the villains in my books, like you come upon them as you travel into the next region, and there's like overarching bad guys that he's building up towards. Their development, if their cultivation, if you will, is happening in the background. Like there's no, I don't waste any time on that, because my focus is on my main character and his small circle of friends. I want to do a villain as the main character in a book series in the future? Yes, I already have it planned out. It's already outlined, and I think it'll be great. But that's like 2 or 3 years down the road. I've got other stuff that's gonna happen way before then.
And I knew that Michael had that. That's why I pointed to him.
Yeah.
Like I think all of us would love to be as good as Black Panther did with Killmonger, where it's like there's a light sprinkling, and the bad guy, you're fully on side with the bad guy, and you're fully on side with the good guy, and we'd all love to be that author, like, or that, storyteller. I mean, that's always my goal. Whether I'm good at it or not, I leave that up to the reader. But that's a tough thing to do. Like, how many movies are out there and books and stuff like that where the bad guy or the just isn't as fleshed out, right? And not everybody can do it. And I'm not saying that I can at all. I really would love to get there. That's the best way I can say it.
Just jump in. I'm curious. Do you think that part of the reason, Will, I'll just go back to what you're saying about why you, well, actually, and Michael as well, but you don't really like seeing the villain's progression or their growth or spending too much time on them. Do you think that your mind would change if maybe, say, in My Hero Academia, could it have been that the villain's plot line was not as connected to what the heroes were doing at the time? Maybe they disconnected it too much. And maybe in something like Black Panther, where Killmonger's progression was directly affecting the events of what the heroes were doing. So do you think if maybe the villain was more integrally tied to what their decisions had an effect on what the heroes were doing, that would change your mind? Or just in general, you're not really a fan of focusing too much on the villains themselves?
Yeah, so Sean, I think what you've said is exactly right. It's the more disconnected it is from the characters I'm invested in, the less I care. But the other, I guess, aspect of that is I'm very impatient. So when I read, if it loses my engagement for too long, I'm going to stop reading. I'm going to stop and I'm going to go read something else, because there's always something else out there that is engaging. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why I gravitate toward web serials, because they have to be engaging, because they got to keep you reading till tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, I don't like having these subplots where my interest might wander. However, you're using the Marvel movies as an analogy, and I think that's a great analogy, because so you take Infinity War, Thanos is the protagonist of that movie, not the antagonist. He's the one who's attempting to accomplish a goal, and the Avengers are standing in his way. So the Avengers are the antagonists of that movie. So they can do that because they built up all these characters over the course of 20 movies prior to that, or 19, or how many. And therefore, Thanos is now, you need a villain that's developed like the heroes are. So they give they give Thanos his own movie to develop him so that he's an antagonist that you know just as well as you do the protagonist. And I think that's great. I think that was a great mechanic for them to do there in that story, and that's something that I can imagine doing, I guess, way out there in a different series. It's not Cradle, but because, like you said, it's directly related to what the heroes are doing. So the villain is doing something that's directly related. But that's, I think, why that works, because it's something that we already knows all these characters. He's in opposition to them, and then he gets his own space. Well, now I'm interested, right? So,
for
Michael,
me,
it sounded like you had something. I'm sorry,
yeah.
Harmon, go ahead.
I was going to just quickly add to one of the issues that question brings up too is, you know, like all of our series are ongoing in some way. So like, you know, depending on the perspective in which we're writing it, like I can't just, you know, have now it's like the fourth book in, it's like now that we're going to focus on the villain. So there's that aspect too. What I've done, and I'll go back to Pilgrim, because Pilgrim is kind of a villain. I mean, he's a former assassin who was raised to kill people and has killed countless people. So he's kind of already like an anti-hero in that way. And I think that that's one of the ways that it plays out for when people like a villain. Is more, it's not they're a villain, it's more of they're an anti-hero. Because I was trying to sit here and think about if there are any villains that like I really recently that I've anime or movie that I've watched or book that I've read that I'm like, oh yeah, I want to get behind that guy. And it's kind of, you know, it's kind of a moot point. There's not anybody I really want to get behind. I'd rather use the villain to challenge the protagonist in a cool way, or even better. I mean, because that's what we're all supposed to do, to make him, you know, like, you know, the whole situation where the villain and the protagonist end up having the same goal in mind. Or like if you think of like Hunter x Hunter, where the villain has the same goal as the protagonist at certain times, like they want to do something at the same, and they need to work with each other. I really like, you know, pitting the villain and the protagonist together sometimes, right? But like, you know, you don't want to overuse that. But that's my best way I think to use it.
Yeah, I like that Jeff Hollingsworth says everyone is a hero in their own story, and I like that idea of kind of putting them together with similar goals. I think that creates an interesting dynamic. Just real quick, wanted to shout out that apparently Travis Baldry is in the chat, and people have been freaking out. Hey, Travis. There was a question up here. Does anybody else have any more to say on that before I jump into the next question?
The only thing that I was going to say is that whenever you're doing your entire series as a first-person past tense, it's really hard to give any time or credit to a villain in the first place, because you have to stay focused in on your character. That's the story that you're telling. So giving any, I guess you could say, screen time to a villain is almost impossible unless it's the protagonist or the main character monologuing about the villain at some point.
So I had a question for Tao. I've always actually kind of wanted to know this. What made you move from LitRPG to Cultivation? I've been interested because I have wanted to see if I could try LitRPG.
I've not moved.
I know that. I was just saying, what made you you were writing that and then you kind of jumped over, and then you're obviously still writing both. I'm just curious.
You do realize I've written a rom-com. I've written basically a whole bunch of short stories, including a humorous ones. I've written a superhero series now. This break does not stop. It's just a question of whether or not I can get things down. Realistically, I wanted to try something new. I was I wouldn't say I was bored of LitRPG, but I wanted to try something new. And 1000 Lee kind of worked, and it got kind of out of control in how successful it got. So I kind of have to write more of it, unlike, you know, some of my other side projects that just die or by the wayside because no one loves them.
That's very inspirational to me. Thank you. I love writing new stuff, but I got Cradle kind of, I don't want to say it trapped me. It infested my body like a parasite. I don't want to say that.
I get it.
But it is, yeah, but it's just
a good parasite.
You get on it, and then the wheel's spinning, and you got to keep the wheel spinning, but then it's hard to get off at that point. And I would love to write other crazy, fun stuff.
Breakout time. Right now I break out either I write 2,000 words on my main project, and I'll switch over to 1,000 words to a side project kind of thing. Or I'll take Friday off, and all I do on Friday is side project. It's whatever works for you. Break it out.
I've never tried that. I should try that. Sounds cool.
Or divvy it up. I divvy it. I usually work on 2 projects at once. Right now I'm working on 2 or 3, and I usually write them. Like I only write one in the morning and only write one at night. So that's just how I separate those. That's one way I've been able to do it, because I'm switching. I mean, like next year, it's like I have Cowboy Necromancer, and then War Priest comes out, and then Pilgrim comes out, and then I'm working on this project. And so the only way to do that is to be able to switch it out. I had to find a new time, and that time was like after I watched TV with my wife from like 11 to midnight. And so that's like my new time to work on a different project. So I don't know if it's good though. I mean, or good for your brain to do that, but it works.
Tao and Harmon, do you find that writing multiple series kind of keeps each one fresh in your mind, keeps things interesting?
It allows me time to gather more influences. So for Cowboy Necromancer, I do a lot of research. Like for the second book, I read 9 history books on the Southwest to find stories and character names and stuff like that. And I visited the Southwest. I'm actually going to the Southwest in 3 days to do research for the 3rd book. And so it gives me time to do that. It's hard for me to just to power through and keep on that same story, grinding and grinding. I like to take a little bit of a break, but make sure you leave yourself notes, because there's nothing worse than having to reread your whole damn story, because you're like I was going somewhere with this. Because when you finish a book, you're on it. You're like, I'm going somewhere with this, and you kind of know where you're going to go next generally. And if you let that go for too long, you have to kind of catch it again.
True.
For me, it's almost the other way. I know where I'm going with a book until I get to the end of it, and I roughly, because I have a rough series outline, I know roughly what I'm going to do for my next book, but it's never very locked in. And so taking a few months off to do another series. Right now, I rotate between System Apocalypse and 1,000 Li as my main series. It gives me that time for the back of my brain to go, oh, I want to do this, and this is how I do it. And so as those 3 months or whatever goes about, I add little mental episodes or scenes. Some of them won't show up. Some of them do show up. Quite often it's the starting scene that shows up, and the ending scene that kind of solidifies, or sort of solidifies, and then everything kind of fills in as I write, because I'm a bit of a pantser in that sense. And if you're wondering about Cyberpunk, just maybe
saw that.
I have a plan for something like similar-ish. I'm done.
All right, well, we're coming up to almost done, so let's try to see if we can fit in one, I guess, a more technical question. And it's how, and this is for a question I would definitely have, because I'm not a very detail-oriented person, but how do you balance characters as they progress? Do you use charts, tables? You keep it all in your head? You guys were talking earlier about leaving notes for yourself so you don't have to reread the entire book. How does that system work?
Spreadsheets. I have so many spreadsheets. My spreadsheets have spreadsheets to make sure I remember what's on the spreadsheets. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
LitRPG is all spreadsheets.
Sure.
1,000 Li is just series Bible. Less spreadsheets, more series Bible.
Yeah, you should see Tao's spreadsheets, actually. Quite a few. not even for some of his books. Like some of it's just market research. Like, it's insane.
LitRPG spreadsheets, other cultivation stuff. You have to keep whatever the system is in place and refer to that. But I try to keep brief character arcs because there's usually several characters. So I try to keep paragraphs of each character, what arc they're currently going through, and for cultivation related things. So that's clear as the book progresses. It's a little bit the same with LitRPG, but not as much, because it's more based on, generally there's one character, unless you want to run everybody's skill sheets, that could be, if you had a whole guild, that could be a lot of people. I tried that before and it became too tiresome, because there was 5 or 6 people and I'm like, damn, it's a lot of stats you have to keep up with to do that. So.
Yeah. And I keep it in my head. That's like I do have some spreadsheets,
wow.
but I keep quite a bit in my head going forward and where people are progressing to. But then as I'm writing forward, I keep what I call my hit lists. So it's like I've just been writing little notes to myself throughout the process of my first draft, just because like sometimes I'll catch myself in something where I'm like, oh, no, that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I'll just write it down and keep going. And so my first draft always differs very, very much because I'll do a lot more of the tracking in the second draft and play my story like a video game is the way that I say it. Like, it's like, okay, I'm going to reread this and I'm going to play the game. That's the way I say it.
Yeah, what I typically do is I make small 2 or 3 inch homunculi of each of my characters with their power set from the books, and I put them on a table or some little gaming table, and I make them actually fight, and then I just write down what the results are in the book. And a lot of times the heroes, they get killed, so I have to change the parameters of the game board or something. I have a lot of backups of Lyndon. I just keep them in a little box.
Broke his leg.
I want to see
well, thank you.
Photo of Lyndon.
I think we're about out of time here. So again, thank you all for coming, those in the chat, and thank you to Michael, Ryan, Will, Harmon, Tao. Thank you so much. For those who are still in the chat, this is not ending. There is a Discord where you can continue talking about this particular panel. And for the giveaway, there is a code word, and that is since 2015. So that is since 2015. So best of luck for the giveaway for that. But thank you again to everyone for joining, and thank you all for being here and for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks, everybody.
Great to meet you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.